You guys out, and then we'll pull you back in when we're... Oh, I think we're already live. Wow. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to Umoja's latest series, which is Community Voice. Today's show is co-hosted by me, Fatima Al-Sayed, and Imran Darimzi. Community Voice talk show incorporates the true essence of Umoja, which means unity. With so many successful and inspiring youth movements and leaders around us, we will be learning their stories, struggles, and ideas to reimagine our own daily lives and goals.
But first, a bit about the Inspire platform, as usual. The Inspire platform is a question and answer platform for career advice in our Shia community. As a rising professional, you can ask for great advice from professionals in our community. And as a mentor, you can give advice to our community's future professionals, as well as students who are maybe younger than you. And this is available via the Umoja app on Android and iOS with an Umoja account. And now on to our speakers. So today we're speaking with Sister Sama Jaffer and Sister Halima Wali from Shia Racial Justice Coalition. And this organization began in response to discussions regarding racism and anti-blackness in our Shia communities. So the aim of SRJC, as I'm sure we'll hear much more about in this show, is to provide resources to help our communities understand and fight racial injustice while uplifting Black Shia voices. And so let's bring in our speakers. Assalamu alaikum, Sister Sama and Sister Halima. Thank you so much for joining us.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you so much for having us.
How are you guys doing?
Doing well, alhamdulillah. The weather's getting better on the East Coast, so that's definitely something to look forward to.
Finally. So before we really get into it, I wanted to hear from Halima a little bit about, how did SRJC start?
Sure. So SRJC started really right after the George Floyd murder last year. Mm-hmm. One of the members, Sister Sakina and I, we just weren't seeing action from our local masajid, from our community centers, and really just staying quiet. And so we figured that something needed to be done, right? Because we saw a lot of other communities speaking up, standing up for what was right in that situation. And we wanted to make sure that our community was doing the same. And so we started reaching out to different masjids, community centers, urging them to release a statement. And it worked, to our surprise, a lot of centers were really receptive to that, and they wanted to learn more. And so we were like, you know what? In the past, Sakina and I were both from New Jersey. We've done local community work, especially in Newark. We raised over $5,000 for the water crisis that's going on in Newark. Mm-hmm. And so we've done sort of these one-off community works, but we figured, okay, how could we make something that's a little bit more formal? And that's where the origins of Shia Racial Justice Coalition began. Sister Komo and Sister Sama then joined on as well because we all shared the same vision. Individually, we had done work around racial justice, but then we, alhamdulillah, all found each other and wanted to do something a little bit more tangible as an organization.
That's incredible.
And since then, Sama, I don't know if you want to mention it, but since then, we've done so much work, and alhamdulillah for the reception in the community and all that.
So I think before we get started with that, could you each tell us about yourselves just a little bit, like a brief intro? Sister Sama, if you want to go first.
Sure, yeah. So I'm a graduate student, currently interested in researching the history of Islam and Muslims, particularly in Western context, North America. And I mean, prior to starting my graduate studies, I was working in community engagement and journalism, and a lot of my work had to do with, I'm from Canada, from Vancouver, and looking at the way that not only racism, but all sorts of social issues affected people here locally. And so when I moved away to pursue my graduate studies, I kind of really felt that lack of kind of connection that I had both to my professional and Islamic communities, to my Muslim community here on the West Coast. And so having the opportunity to connect with Komal and Halima and Sakina, who were doing this really incredible work, was, only possible because of the pandemic as well. But alhamdulillah, it was great to kind of find this like small community of incredible Muslim women, Shia Muslim women that were interested in kind of prioritizing racial justice in our communities.
Can you give us a quick run through of some of the events that you've actually done so far?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been about less than a year actually, and our advocacy work started out with Halima and Sakina were raising money in the immediate aftermath of the George Floyd murder to support protests. So they were funding things like water and supplies for people that were on the streets, and then thereafter, we had a series of online events that included lectures and panel discussions, lectures on race and liberation within the Islamic tradition with folks such as Hajj Muhammad Ali and Sheikh Jafar Mohibullah and Professor Sylvia Chan Malik. We've had a training session with the Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative, Muslim ARC, who are we consider to be really close partners and friends, who came in and did a training with us early in the fall with several leaders and youth from across North America from Shia Muslim communities across the continent. We also had a pretty exciting social media campaign during Ramadan that was centering the voices of Black Shia Muslim community leaders, activists, and scholars. We've had a film screening on incarceration and discussion around that, as well as abolition. And we hosted a town hall in collaboration with some of our other community partners prior to the election. So it's like there was quite a few things. There's also events. Yeah. So alhamdulillah, like the kind of the second half of 2020 was really robust, I think, in the kind of programming that we were able to offer and the conversations that we were able to have. And kind of like Halima mentioned, our organization did coalesce around this moment of the anti-racism reckoning at the end during the summer of 2020, when a lot of our communities were kind of reacting in that moment and wanting to do something. We saw this kind of desire to have conversations, to host events, to really kind of also take a moment to like introspectively think about where have we not been addressing racism in our own communities, and how are we actually maybe a part of this problem. And so we saw that, and we saw this kind of desire from our communities to learn and to kind of have these conversations, but kind of having some foresight and knowing how these things are, we had a feeling that it wouldn't last. It would kind of fizzle out after a few months and after a few events. And so part of creating the Shia Racial Justice Coalition was to do just that, was to kind of make sure that these conversations were something that we could continue to have in our communities long beyond the summer of 2020.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that, because it's built within our discourse, I think, culturally, that racism is built within the discourse, which is sad to say, but it's something that we all have to work as communities to sort of eliminate. I see that within the pre-interview, one of you mentioned that we do have Black Shia Muslims. Why is it important to make this point clear? Whoever wants to go.
I can start, and then Samah, if you want to add. Growing up for myself, I was always surrounded by other Afghans. I was surrounded by other South Asian groups. And so for me, like, I never really interacted with Black Shia Muslims. And it, unfortunately, like, it's not something that I was aware of until I was an adult. And so it's the Black Shia community is often marginalized, and not only marginalized just because of their skin color, but marginalized further because they are Shia as well, right? And so a lot of Shias are not necessarily welcome in general Muslim spaces, and so I think it's very important to make that distinction, because if we aren't making that distinction, there's no way that we're eradicating anti-blackness in our communities. To hit the point home, one of the things that I learned much more recently is that some of our imams, our beloved imams, alayhi salam, they had Black or African descent, in them. And that's often not something that you hear, right? And so
Right.
for us to uplift marginalized communities, that also means uplifting within our own, right? And that includes the Black Shia Muslim community that we often don't hear about. And so one of the missions of SRJC was to make sure we amplify Black Shia voices and making sure that we make those connections from, let's say, the South Asian community, the Arab community, into the Black Shia Muslim community, because there are great scholars and activists in that community that we haven't been necessarily tapping into.
And if everyone wants to stay until the end, we're going to actually play a couple of the clips from the Black Shia Muslims that you guys have amplified, the voices that you have amplified, which is amazing. Imran, if you want to go with your next question.
Yes, and I think we were talking about the Muharram minutes that you guys had done. That was, I think, a great example of highlighting Black Shia voices. So I have the thumbnails here. If you maybe want to talk us through that, and then we could play the clip.
Sure. Yeah. So this initiative was, like, if you remember, Muharram last year was around August, and so it was towards the end of the summer when we'd had several of these kind of events already that we had organized in collaboration with some of our partners, including Yasin Ed in California, as well as the Muslim Council of Southern California, Muslim ARC, and the Hussein Center for Social Justice. And so after having several kind of, these were more lecture types of events where people came on Zoom or watched the kind of live stream on Facebook. And we'd had several conversations on the themes of racial justice in the Shia communities, talking about cultural identity, solidarity, and also like thinking about what it means to enact anti-racism in the context of awaiting the 12th Imam and awaiting the Imam of our time, Imam Mahdi and alayhi salam. And so we'd had several conversations, and we knew that this was like a lot for people to think about and to kind of continue to have this conversation. And so through Muharram, we wanted to do something a little bit different that would keep people engaged, keep these conversations going in our homes and in our kind of virtual spaces as we were still in the thick of this pandemic. And so that's where the idea for Muharram Minutes came about. And we partnered with another organization as well to talk to some of the really inspiring leaders and activists and scholars in our communities to reflect on what the message of Imam Hussein that we commemorate every year meant kind of in this particular moment. It's obviously a timeless message of the victory of justice over oppression, of good over evil. And we wanted to really kind of think about that in the context and to really see what that message meant to people right now, today, and how it kind of either inspires the work they do or really just kind of is a part of the way that they're living their lives. And so it was a really beautiful example, and inshallah we'll see this clip of Sheikh Noor.
Yes. Okay, so hopefully we can hear it.
The composition of the camp of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam is a true manifestation of activism against racism. It was all-inclusive, and each member of the camp, irrespective of his or her age, background, or race, was made to feel welcomed and comfortable by our beloved master, Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam. It is that time of the year when we are expected to renew our allegiance by learning from Karbala and Ashura. Yes, we do have racism within our communities. Let us join our hands together to stand against racism and aim to eradicate racism of whatever form within our communities. It is our duty and responsibility. And Abu Abdullah al-Hussein and his companions showed us the way. Assalamu ala al-Hussein wa ala Ali ibn al-Hussein wa ala awlad al-Hussein wa ala ashab al-Hussein wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
I think that's such an amazing message that the true message of Karbala is, bringing people together and working against racism. But one thing that I guess stands out to me, and this also stood out to me when this was all at the forefront in the summer, was in order to start the work towards eradicating racism, you have to be humble and accept that there is racism in our communities. So I think that brings up the point, and I wanted to ask you, when you were, I guess, forming this organization and approaching different communities, was there any pushback that you faced? So maybe like communities saying, there's no racism here, or like, don't criticize us, things like that, or even if it wasn't so explicit, did you feel any of that like sentiment?
I think when we were encouraging community centers and masjids to release some sort of statement around the George Floyd death, there was some pushback there. Some masjids didn't want to necessarily say anything, or if they did say something, it was very vague in terms of its wording. They wanted to stay away from saying anything along the lines of like Black Lives Matter, or like anything that was like too anti-police or what have you. But over time, I think more centers were very much receptive to it, because we were coming equipped with information. We, even as an org, one of the things we recognized very quickly was that translated resources will go a long way. And so we had translated Letters for Black Lives, which was something that an organization had put together. We translated that into both Urdu and Farsi, in hopes that, getting that out to the masses, especially to the elders, who are oftentimes the folks at different masajid and community centers, like really running the show. Getting translated resources to them so that they could understand what's going on, understand the racialized background to all those things. And I think that really helped get the ball rolling. And then, having just different contacts at different centers who had an in with, the board at the masjid, or had an in with like the specific elder that like, you have to get the approval from.
Right.
And so I think over time, folks just became more receptive. Whereas in the beginning and the heat of the George Floyd aftermath, a lot of centers were a bit more reserved, a bit more hesitant. But things definitely have gotten better since then. Of course, we still have much more work to do, but we're definitely, from my perspective, making slow but steady progress.
Yeah, I'll just add one thing real quickly. Like what Halima said, I think the importance of like kind of having that translated materials and things like that. We recognize that this conversation, particularly around social justice and anti-racism, is one that a lot of the younger generation was well versed in already. It was something we're familiar with. It's something we've kind of grown up understanding, the particular histories of racism, the history of anti-blackness and slavery in America in particular. And so it was something that was really new for a lot of the older generation. And so part of the idea both of like coalition building and of working with our communities was that we recognize that there's a lot of like learning and unlearning that has to be done. And we wanted to kind of be able to provide the resources that are necessary, not only for us to be doing that work, but to kind of empower the youth and the community leaders in their own communities to have these conversations.
That's actually what I was just going to ask you. So that's amazing. Our next question would be, how can people get involved with your work? And what specifically would they be doing?
So there's a couple of ways that you can get involved. Let's say in your own community, you want to run some type of event, or you want to do something in your own community. We're more than happy to collaborate, to sort of be like a co-sponsor, to assist or support in any way that we can, especially when it's around topics of racial justice. So, change and impacting your own community starts at home, right? So if there's anything that you think can happen in your community, that you think we would be, that we would align with, let us know and reach out to us. We're always open to assisting. We have, after Ramadan, inshallah, we'll have another Muslim anti-racism training. And so that's a really great way for everyone of all ages to get involved. Muslim ARC is a really great org. We've done one training with them so far where people of all ages joined to learn more about anti-racism work. So inshallah, we'll have another one after Ramadan that we encourage young and old, not old, young and wise to join. And so we have that. And like, honestly, just, taking the resources that we're putting out there and introducing that to your own community, right? We try to have as big of a reach as possible, but of course we can't get to every corner or every masjid in the US or across the world. So anything that you can take from us, if there's something that you think can help your community, that you think we can support or assist with, we're happy to do that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's exactly what I was trying to get at with the coalition building part. One of the incredible things that came out of the last Muslim ARC training that we hosted was we met people from all over North America who were already doing really incredible things within their own communities. And so it was not only an opportunity for us to come together and to receive this training from Muslim ARC in their anti-racism competencies, but we also had a chance to kind of start building our network and kind of seeing who is doing this work already and who we can kind of collaborate with and share resources and kind of when it comes to the events that we're putting on in the future, which inshallah we should have. If you follow us on social media, I think the ticker has some of our Instagram handles, which we will inshallah be releasing within the next couple of weeks what our Ramadan programming is going to be as well. So keep an eye on that space for more of that, because I think the kind of the more conversations that we're in together, it allows for these connections and collaborations to happen in a way that really is only facilitated by this moment where we are all online and virtual, which alhamdulillah is a bit of a silver lining.
Yeah,
definitely.
Sama, I wanted to ask you, can you give us a little more detail about the Muslim anti-racism training?
Yeah, absolutely. So what it is we have the trainers from Muslim ARC will come. It's on Zoom, a couple of hours. And what it is it's a really interactive workshop where they'll take us through several materials and interactive kind of ways in which we're identifying the kind of systemic as well as interpersonal and intercommunal racism that exists within our communities. And each one is a different level. So the first level that we've already conducted, if you haven't attended, it's okay. You can contact us ahead of time to get some of the resources to prepare you in order to participate in the second one. And so it's about 2 hours long, and it includes, like I said, going through some of their presentations as well as a lot of interactive breakout sessions and activities that is both on introspection and really kind of training us to think about anti-racism through the framework that they've created.
So I think transitioning into that, and again, your website is on the ticker, so that should be updated soon with your future programs, right?
Yes.
Next month. Okay. So I think that the final piece of this, we want to really ask you, what do you personally get out of this work? And maybe if we want to start with Sama, and then I know Halima, you didn't introduce yourself earlier, so we can go back to you and you can kind of answer both of those.
She thought she got out of it.
Sorry.
No worries. I think okay. Yeah, I think for anyone that's doing this work, it is deeply personal. It is something that for me, I mentioned briefly before that I kind of grew up doing a lot of work in my local community at the Zahra Islamic Center in Vancouver in particular, and was kind of involved in the youth committee and in organizing there, as well as then when I went to university, I was really involved in kind of what you could call like the Muslim activist scene in Vancouver as well, where we were really having a lot of conversations on Islamophobia, thinking through the kinds of changes that were happening in what we observed around us politically, socially, and thinking about the way that as Muslims as well, we are racialized in North America, and what does that mean and what does that look like in terms of our daily interactions with other people as well as with each other. And so for me, this work in particular was kind of, feels a bit, and I don't mean to sound like cheesy about it, but like a bit like a homecoming where I had this kind of time where I was, a little bit away from my community and from this work, but it was something that I always felt like I was missing, and something that I felt deeply connected to it in terms of just it being really meaningful to have these conversations, but not only conversations, but thinking about the way that we can both make ourselves and our communities places that are better.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing. Halima, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, so much of what Sama said resonates with me in the sense that this type of work is deeply personal to me. I hold the values of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, very closely to me, and not just in remembrance, but also in character and my actions and how that is manifested in the community work that I do, especially for those that are oppressed, especially for those that are less advantaged. And so for me, it's a very deeply personal thing to ensure that equality, equity, justice, all of those themes that we are taught so much of growing up as Shia, themes that are very prevalent in Muharram, for example, and really just in all of our imams and everything. So, the best way that I can resonate, or the best way that I can, exemplify, I guess, those characteristics is through community work. And so I've done community work within the Afghan diaspora for about 5 years now. And it's along this very much the same lines, uplifting those that don't have a voice, uplifting those that are on the marginalized end of the stick. And so it's very just a fulfilling thing for me. Like, I don't necessarily look for anything other than advancing the marginalized, right? And it's very fulfilling to me. Like, and going into more about who I am, I work in IT professionally as my day job, and so I have a 9 to 5. I do that, and then I switch gears into the community work that I'm very much passionate about. And a lot of the IT work that I do, becomes very helpful when it comes to community work. For SRJC, if anyone visits our website, I built our website, so you can go take a look. If it looks great, let me know. If there's anything that's broken, let me know too, so I can fix it. And so using the skills and stuff that I've learned in my day-to-day professional career, I've been blessed to apply it to the community work that I do. And so that's essentially who I am, why I do the work that I do. I'm just very motivated and driven to raise the marginalized, especially in America when there's so much racial and economic disparities. I think it becomes ever more important to make sure that you're doing your part, especially within your own community, but in the broader lens of it as well.
One last question that we have for you. What advice do you have for youth on how they can approach their own community centers in order to add more anti-racism? It could be seminars, it could be lectures within their mosques, or to help in any way possible.
Sama, do you want to go first?
Go ahead.
So I will say this, having done a lot of community work in my masjid as a youth, sometimes it can get very frustrating because when you're dealing with some elders that are controlling all aspects of the masjid, the programming and all that, it can become a little bit disheartening. And so what I would say to the youth is to not give up, to push for these types of programming. And in the event that you don't necessarily receive the response that you're hoping for, do something outside of the realm of the masjid. Get a couple of your friends or people from the youth group itself to do like a weekend, active service, community service type thing, volunteering, so on and so forth. If you have an idea that you want to flesh out, please reach out to us. We're more than happy to assist in fleshing out those ideas. Even if you need like speakers or stuff like that, alhamdulillah, we've created quite a network, within the SRJC umbrella. So we have folks that we can assist you with any type of programming that you want to do. But don't give up. Be persistent. That would be like my main advice.
Absolutely. Everything Halima said, as well as I think I don't want to reveal our age or anything, but Halima and I are on the older end of the youth spectrum, and I think with that kind of experience, we're more than happy to help advise or to even, like we said, collaborate. Sometimes that just kind of helps to have another partner organization to kind of bounce ideas with, as well as, like Halima said, connect you to other speakers and other groups that would be interested in uplifting your work.
Mm-hmm. Well, that is unfortunately all the time we have for now. But thank you so much, both of you, for coming on and sharing your work. And we are really looking forward to see what you do next month and also
in the future.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you. This is lovely.
For sure. You were just listening to the Community Voice talk show, where we heard from the people behind Shia Racial Justice Coalition. And to hear a replay of this show, you can visit the Umoja website under prior talk shows on the You Mentor tab, or you can subscribe to our Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, or YouTube channels.
And please join us next week for the You Mentor talk show. Umoja Outreach Foundation, uniting and empowering the Shia community.